Grace, a migrant worker, worked in a house where her employers physically, sexually, and emotionally abused her. She works 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, never a day off. Her employers hit her with a rattan stick and slammed her hand in between the door in anger. Her story is among one of the many stories of victims stuck in the crippling web, human trafficking. Malaysia is a diverse land, blessed with many cultures. Being one of the growing nations of the East and boasting 2 cities as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, all seems well. It would then be surprising to hear that Grace was brought to Penang, Malaysia, with the promise of a good income job. To find out more about human trafficking, we approached Cindy Rubel, a human trafficking advocate, to find out what this is and how it is like here in Malaysia.
I would define human trafficking as modern-day slavery. And the way that people end up in these situations of trafficking varies greatly because it depends on the type of trafficking that they are in. And I brought with me today a hotspot map of Penang that gives a variety of ways in which people are trafficking in Penang. Now this was prepared by Tanaganita several years ago, so we could add many more stars to this map today based on our caseload. But it includes baby trafficking, mail order brides or forced marriage, labor trafficking, domestic workers, and it's a variety of different ways that people are abused for money. The one thing they all have in common is it's about money. A good while back, and I was just amazed that this video was actually on the internet, that there was a trafficker talking to the cameraman as though what he did was something legal.
Oh, wow.
And so I wrote a script down from what he was saying, and I'll share that with you. This is the words of a human trafficker in Malaysia. It isn't that difficult to bring girls into Malaysia. We usually lure them by offering an easy job with a good salary. In some cases, we'll marry them, though this mode is too expensive. After the wedding, we'll lure them to come with us to Malaysia. Sometimes we also lure her friends to come along with us. This is to maximize profits. If they refuse to sleep with our clients, we use physical means, or we won't give them any food until they give in. Only after they obey us will we sell them to other pimps, or we just keep them confined. They'll be watched by our bodyguards day and night, so they won't be able to run away. We usually look for teenage girls, like 17-year-olds. If they happen to be virgins, we'll get even more profit. Many customers look for virgins. We'll charge customers around 1,000 ringgit or 2,000 ringgit based on negotiations for a single round with a virgin. Most of the girls are taken from poor Javanese families, and we usually target families with huge amounts of debt. They are usually willing to let their daughters go to Malaysia. Actually, the parents wouldn't know nothing about their daughter's work in Malaysia. There are many cheap hotels where we harbor them. They'll be sometimes booked for an entire night. The price depends on negotiation with customers. Sometimes we'll place them at karaoke bars or nightclubs. There are many customers there. We also have extensive networks. We don't keep the girls for too long in one place in order to avoid the police. So we move them around to avoid being detected.
So what was promised to be a job, a breakthrough for the family, quickly turned into a lie that destroyed her life.
They don't run away often because they don't see any way out. And sometimes the controls on their lives are so heavy that they can't get out. I mean, they quite literally are locked in. Even domestic workers here, we often hear stories of they lock us in. You know, I cannot physically get out of the house. And so what happens is that when there is any kind of opening, they take it eventually. But some don't run, even though they might be able to get out of the house because somebody has, the employer has their passport.
Yeah.
If they have their passport, they know they can't get home.
Oh.
They can't get back home, so if they run, then what? You know, and so out of fear, they stay. Sometimes they stay because they haven't been paid, and their hope is that the employers promise that I'll pay you in 2 years at the end of the contract. They're hoping that that money is really going to come. And so then, you know, when you get to 2 years and they want to renew the contract and you still haven't received any money from the first 2 years, I would say at the point they lose hope that the money's ever coming, or at the point that the abuse is so bad,
They just
you
give
can't,
up.
she can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
That's when they run. The impact on them can be almost a level of fear that's very hard to live with. They're scared. They don't know who to trust anymore. So there's a loss of trust in other people. So even when NGOs come in and are trying to help them, it may take a while to build trust back.
Yeah.
And sometimes they've had trust so badly broken that they are unable to reach out or share their story initially with anybody. And it may take them a little while before they can. And when we're talking about children and trafficking, sexual assault on anybody, I mean, if you think about even one-time abuse, one-time sexual abuse, even if it's not trafficking, can have lifelong impact. And so when you're talking about sex trafficking in a child, that's repeated rape. And a lot of times I think we don't think about sex trafficking as what it really is. Whether it's a child or an adult, it's somebody who's being forced to have sex against their will. And so that means being raped multiple times in a day. Now, if one rape can cause lifelong impact and trauma, imagine what it does to have a child who has been raped multiple times, day after day after day. I mean, the impact, can you even recover from that level of trauma? You know, certainly it has changed that person's life forever.
What has the Malaysian government done about this? According to the TIP report by the US Department of State, it has done close to nothing. Investigation reports and criminal convictions lessened in 2013 compared to 2012 because of the Malaysian government's decision to decrease anti-trafficking law enforcement efforts. NGOs reported that police and Labour Department officials often failed to investigate complaints of the confiscation of passports and travel documents or withholding of wages, especially involving domestic workers, as possible trafficking offences. These frontline officers failed to recognise indicators of trafficking and instead treated these cases as immigration violations. Human trafficking victims are brought in from countries like Vietnam, Uganda, Somalia, Ethiopia, Thailand, and Laos by outsourcing companies. A complex system of recruitment and contracting fees often deducted from the workers' wages makes workers vulnerable to debt bondage. When the government introduced a policy in 2013 that shifted the burden of paying the immigration and employment authorization fees from the employer to the foreign workers, this further increased the risk of debt. When looked in a global context, there is so much work to be done, and many countries are not doing enough. There are 3 tiers by which a country's efforts in fighting human trafficking is recognized. Tier 1 refers to countries whose governments fully comply with the Trafficking Victims Protection Act's minimum standards. Tier 2 are countries whose governments do not fully comply but are making significant efforts to comply with the standards. And Tier 3 refers to countries whose governments do not fully comply with the minimum standards and are not making significant efforts to do so. In the East Asia region, only Taiwan and South Korea have reached Tier 1. Out of 188 countries recorded by the report, only 31 countries fully comply with the TVPA standards, and Malaysia is in Tier 3. But what are the profits that traffickers earn? In 2014, the International Labour Office (ILO) estimates that a total of 150 billion in legal profits is generated per year, about 3 times more than previously estimated. 99 billion was generated through commercial sexual exploitation, while the rest resulted from forced economic exploitation. About 21 million people are estimated to be victims of this modern-day slavery. The vast profits, coupled with many countries' poor attempt at curbing this issue, do encourage this venture even more. Human trafficking is a very real problem, happening right in our countries, our states, our neighborhoods. In order to solve it, it requires well thought out and executed efforts, not only by those who are in seats of power, but by seemingly ordinary folk like you and me, who can choose not to keep silent when girls like Grace cross our paths.